To me, Eckhart describes this relationship. He said, love is nothing other than God. God loves himself and his nature, his being, and his divinity. In the same love, however, in which God loves himself, he also loves all creatures. Not as creatures, but he loves them as creatures as God. He loves the creatures as God. Let me say that correctly. Not as creatures, but he loves the creatures as God. In another place, he says, God loves all creatures equally and fills them with his being. Now, this is not just humans. This is all creatures. And we should lovingly meet all creatures in the same way. Eckhart says God makes possible and then breathes into everything that has ever been. The breath comes from a miraculous source, says Eckhart, and this makes "thou shalt not kill" more than a prohibition or a guideline for somewhat ignorant people. Thou shalt not kill is a reminder that all breath is a miracle, given by a power more mighty than we can imagine, and this breath should always be protected. This is not a new idea. It is scattered throughout religion and philosophy. Eckhart and many others shared it hundreds of years ago. But a similar fragment of an idea started for me when I was in junior high school, although I'm just now beginning to understand the views I held then. When I was in 7th grade, I was invited to go along with a few guys on a trip to the woods near the edge of town. They were going out with BB guns, something they all had. I did not. I was a bookworm, and it was nice to be invited. And my father had fought in the war and chosen against having any guns in the house. That was his choice. So I was pleased that one of my friends allowed me to carry his father's pistol-shaped BB gun. I felt cool. I was with it. Their BB guns looked like rifles, you know. I had a pistol, a pistolero, I said. Just having it made me feel more powerful. I get that sense. I get that sense. There is a pleasure that comes with carrying a gun. That afternoon, we rode our bikes to the park and found a trail. We stopped occasionally for shooting. BBs are cheap. And then I noticed a red-winged blackbird sitting on a limb about 50 to 75 feet away. And I lifted my pistol and I shot, never imagining I would hit it. But that blackbird pulled back into itself and fell to the ground dead. My buddies were saying, way to go, wow, did you see that? They were impressed. I was not. I had seen that blackbird recoil. It had been sitting on a branch, merrily tweeting away, and then its life was snuffed out. That brings us to where we are. An AmeriCorps volunteer mistaken for a gangbanger. A woman held up while walking home from her social work job. A boy shot over a frozen cup dispute. A New Orleans police department dispatcher and her 2 adult children hunted down, police say, by her estranged boyfriend. 3 children, ages of 11, 1 and 7 months, all killed by bullets that police say were intended for their caregivers. I'm often immune to these reports, but no more. Because I believe, and have long believed, it is time to reconsider the availability of guns. Many countries do not have a great number of guns in the way that we do. I ask that we step away from our daily milieu and review what is and what has been happening around us, and then let us find a level of concern and compassion that truly values the inherent worth, the dignity, and the very life of every person. The Apostle Paul wrote several verses about human weakness. I recently heard that very few Christian ministers address this text. They do not want to admit that Paul had a problem, and you could hear something of a problem in the subtext, and Paul was a very important figure in Christianity. So I read a number of the versions of this, and I went to the Orthodox Jewish Bible because it is based on the Jewish tradition. And because it is based on the Jewish tradition, I will have to have several small explanations as we go forward. Here is what it says. For we have da'as, a belief, that the Torah is ruchanit, spiritual. For we have a belief that the Torah is spiritual. But I am of the basar, fallen humanity, sold under the power of Chet Kadmon, original sin, a slave master. But I am of the fallen humanity, sold under the power of sin. For I do not have to ask what I do, for that which I commit is not what I want. No, it is what I hate that I do. But if that which I do is what I do not want, I agree with the Torah that the Torah is good. But now it is no longer I doing this, but the power of Chet, which dwells within me. For I have da'as that there dwells in me, that is, in my basar, no good thing, which really means, for I have a belief that there dwells in me, in my fallen humanity, enslaved to human tendencies, no good thing, not there. For the wish to do right lies ready at hand for me, but to accomplish the good is not. For I fail to do good as I wish, but hara, the evil, which I do not wish, is what I commit. So said the Apostle Paul. Now, the Torah being described as good refers to divine teachings. It refers to goodness, the good in us, the way we would like to live. These teachings bring home to us the gorgeous and beautiful place for human civilization on this planet, our earth. However, says Paul, self-interested humans find ways to ignore this beauty. And if we jump now to today and look at the presence of guns and their use, American society has succumbed to a base impulse, a very base impulse, to take the lives of anyone who has mistreated us. This is not of the divine order described by Paul this is the base underlying dark impulses that lead to the taking of life. Sometimes when I go to meditation sessions, I'm invited to enter fantasy land, and sometimes you can see things from a place where you don't normally sit. So I'm going to invite you to such a fantasy land for a few moments. Just imagine, if you could, and just settle back for a little bit and take a deep breath. And imagine that you could rise into the air and settle in amongst the clouds. I don't see any clouds out there today, but up there, and look down. And as you looked at this earth, you would see an exquisitely lovely terrain, the earth and the sea, the rivers and the forests. And through it all, there would be animals of many types. And you would notice when you look that unless an animal is hungry, they get along. They share their space. I know this because my backyard holds feral cats, a possum, raccoon, and they share that space. But this get-alongness has disappeared from humanity. And as we look down, we can see that it has disappeared. We can see that violence competes with our best natures. We can see perfection in creation with little or no such inclination within people. Not enough, not at all times. You can be pulled down. Another exercise, imagine swimming with dolphins. The dolphins are second to humans in brain size. I read that 7% of our body is brain, they are 5% brain. And their brain is intricate, which scientists tell us their neocortex is more highly convoluted than ours. They are self-aware and able to process complex emotions, says Discovery News. But I have never seen a dolphin with a gun. It would be a shock to see a dolphin with a firearm. So consider this. Human evolution has led us as people to a status where we are the only creature on the earth that produces instruments of destruction. And what happens when that is the case? Well, on Friday, a high school student shot 5 of his classmates, killing one and then turning the gun on himself. My question immediately is, why does a high school student have a gun? And then I stop asking that question because I know that guns are available almost everywhere. If it was in his house for protection, that method of protection backfired. Just ask his parents. But his suicide is not a surprise because more die from suicide than homicide in our country. Guns were used for 11,078 homicides in 2010. 68% of all homicides were with guns. Firearms were used in 19,392 suicides in 2010. Not quite double, but pretty close. Constituting almost 62% of all gun deaths were by suicide. Over 50% of all suicides are committed with a firearm. Yes, there are other ways of exiting life if you choose to do so, but guns are used for 50%. On average, 49 gun suicides were committed every day for the years 2005 and 2010. Do we have too many guns? You may recall it amazed us when Rodney King asked, why don't we all just get along? There is a goodness within us, but it competes with impulses that lead us astray. The Apostle Paul described the difficulty of reaching a point where our best self continually triumphs over the pull of our less than perfect human nature. The spiritual journey involves the effort to free us from these imperfections. And the way this relates to guns is that Americans have chosen to make these instruments of death accessible without a background check, without regulations. It is as if the gun lobby wants to make certain every high school student can take a gun to school, and then we have security guards and armed teachers in Texas schools, and Texas is reportedly going to give college students the rights to carry guns on campus. So I guess next semester every college student in Texas is getting straight A's, said Conan O'Brien. John Oliver said, one failed attempt at a shoe bomb and we all take off our shoes at the airport. 31, that was then, school shootings since Columbine, and no change in our regulation of guns. Think about that. And of course, the last couple of years, I have had the opportunity to attend several memorial services for young African Americans who were killed in this city. And I have realized that the pain in their community is no different than the pain that we feel in ours when someone is lost. I also recognize that there is a group of people, and I think many of our young people, who are benumbed, but benumbed while deep in pain. A grandmother recently said to me, "You don't know about this." She said, "But every time one of my two grandsons leave the house, I fear for them. Every time they go out," she said. Seems to me that the mystical, creative force, whatever it might be, it may be as I described earlier, it may be something completely different, but just the whole dynamic of life on this planet, use whatever you wish for that, please do. But that force that I believe lives in each of us has to be displeased with the end of every person's life, because that force is in that life too. As Eckhart said, breath should always be protected. If we lift up the value of life, if we hold it as being filled with inherent worth and dignity, then the instruments that cause the end of life are equally culpable. The participation of a gun in a murder should not be condoned or explained or reasoned away. The use of a gun in a suicide should not be shrugged off as we discuss the person's mental health. The use of an instrument of power to disrupt the precious gift of being should never be accepted, applauded, praised, encouraged, or argued for. In times of our cultural, notice I did not say political, debates. And we are involved in cultural debates as we look forward. I found out yesterday afternoon that the 14-year-old who shot 5 classmates before killing himself was a football player. 2 of the people he shot were cousins. He had just been named a freshman class homecoming prince, and he had used his father's gun. Some will, I know, blame the father for not locking up the gun. Others may blame the classmate who asked this boy's girlfriend out on a date. Others will blame the shooter because teenage jealousy carried him off the deep end. Some will wonder why this young man had not received counseling, although there was no evidence, as popular as he was, that counseling was necessary. There will be reasons galore. And all of them, I predict, will be directed at the people involved. But will anyone look at the gun? I believe it is time to say we must look at the gun. Will anyone dare to stand up and say we have to change our gun laws? I believe it is time to do so. Do we dare to see the pain and the disruption of breath of others in our human family? As a religious community, do we dare look at the breath as precious? And can that insight lead us, having taken another look at it, to the regulation of guns, placing them only in the hands of those who are assuredly worthy and able to manage their presence? Can we regulate guns? I think we can. We did it with cigarettes. We can do it with guns too. And so I ask, how about you? Is this an issue that is important to you? I just ask that you think about it. It's all I ask you to do. But for me, I come from a place where many years ago, I fought to be an RA. In my heart, I fought. But I kept my mouth shut for fear of what they might be able to do to me. May the love in your hearts find love in the hearts of those around you. Namaste. Our closing hymn is number 144.